Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you a mail art envelope. This is part of my mail art rainbow. I'm into the kind of pinks and purples, so I thought I would break out my Caran Brush Marker Pro markers and kind of do a little pink and purple lettering on an envelope. I also paired that with a very simple black and white banner with the address on it, and I'm going to walk you through the creation of the envelope right now. Let's get started. I'm starting out by creating a watercolor paper envelope using my 123 punch board from We Are Memory Keepers to create the watercolor envelope. Now, I use the 123 punch board specifically because I like to make larger envelopes. And for an envelope that will fit a 5x7 card, you do need to have that little swing out arm so you can score the full length of the watercolor paper. The watercolor paper I'm using today is from Canson, and I'm going to be using some Caran watercolor markers on this envelope today, like I mentioned in the intro. First, I'm writing out Susan's name using the magenta color, and I'm just doing it very simply on a little bit of a curved line at a diagonal. And I'm making sure that I have lots of thicks and thins so that I have plenty of this color to work with when I add my secondary color, which is a purple. So these particular markers are very, very juicy. So you will want to be careful about, running your hand over something that's not dry. So I've put down another piece of paper covering up her last name so that I can rest my hand against my work surface. Now, I tried adding the color and using a watercolor brush to spread out that color, but I didn't feel like I had quite as much control as I had hoped. So I used one of the blender pens that comes from Caran in their big sets. So I added just a little bit of purple on the top and bottom of each letter, going all the way across her first name and last name. And then I used the blender pen to spread that color up and have it sort of mix with that pink magenta shade that I wrote on there first. So when I first started using the blender pen, I was concerned. It didn't look like it was smoothing out at all. But then I realized, and you'll see here, as it dries, the color does smooth out in the paper and you don't have any strange little color mixing areas. So just trust the process. These definitely blend really, really well. You can do a similar thing with your Tombow markers or even Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. You just might have a little bit of a different look since these Caran markers have liquid in the barrel of the marker and they're very, very juicy, like I mentioned before. So I continued adding all of that purple, and I love how it kind of blends it in and almost gives this a multicolor look because you have all the colors in between when it transitions from the magenta to that purple shade. I think it looks really, really great. I also had a piece of that scratch paper down below that I could clean off my blender pen if I wanted to make sure I didn't have too much color on the brush. I then took a white gel pen and just added some highlights so it gives a little bit of dimension to the words. And then I hit that with my heat tool just to help speed along the drawing process. Like I mentioned, these are very juicy markers, and if you're not careful, you really can smudge them while you're working. Then took a pencil and I drew on a very simple banner shape with a little bit of a curve. I added a folded area on both sides of this banner. I drew the first one right below the letter Y on her last name. And then I drew the bottom one and then started to roughly plan out where the words would be for her address so I knew exactly how long that banner needed to be. I then grabbed a Sharpie marker. I've got two Sharpie markers I'm using on this envelope. This first one is a fine tip Sharpie marker. I used this one to outline the banner and make sure I got all the way into those corners that I drew with the banner. And then I grabbed a larger Sharpie and filled in to make it so it's completely solid. I switched markers just because it was a little bit easier to fill in those areas, and quite a bit faster actually, to fill in those areas with a larger Sharpie marker. When it comes to the areas that were right up against that black banner, I decided to do some really thin pinstripes just to differentiate the area. So I did that for the connector piece between the two sides of the banner and then also where it's folded. I then grabbed an eraser. This is my favorite eraser. It's an arch eraser. And then I also have this little itty bitty eraser from Tombow that I use to erase a little bit of pencil line right up and next to her first name. I used that same white gel pen that I used on her name over the watercolor lettering, and I very simply added the address onto this black banner. I wanted it to be very, very simple, not distract too much away from the design. So I didn't do any fancy lettering or writing, just very plain capital letters, filling in all of that space going all the way across this banner. So I just slowed down, took my time. Of course, you can't tell how fast I'm going because I did speed up the video, but when I'm lettering, I do slow down quite a bit. I then grabbed this pale gray marker, also from Caron. It's a Brush Marker Pro, and I colored in the areas where I used those pinstripes, as well as I added some shadows using this gray marker. I added a shadow to the bottom and to the right of all of the different elements, including the lettering up here at the top. Just made sure I added a little bit of a gray line, just a very slight shadow. It's pretty subtle. If you're not like really looking for it, you might not have even noticed that I added it, but it does give it just even more dimension. So in order to protect this area, I'm using some Distress Glaze. I've got a mini round blending tool that I've dipped into the jar, and I'm going to start circling over this entire area with that Distress Micro Glaze. This Distress Micro Glaze puts a very thin coating over the area and makes it waterproof, or I should say water resistant, so that any moisture will not pick up any of that marker that I put down earlier and kind of move it around. Now, I did want to mention that as I was adding it to the envelope, it does spread the color just a tiny bit, but 95% of it is picked up by the paper towel when you go over it to kind of buff off any of the excess. I put a second coat just because I wanted to make sure that everything was as water resistant as possible. And you'll notice that on the paper towels that a little bit of that color was transferred. Then put some tape adhesive on the bottom flap of the envelope and peeled up the release paper and then folded that up, and this created the envelope. The last thing to do is to add some postage up in that top right corner. I used a couple Forever USPS stamps and then just 2 vintage ones. I wanted to have kind of a pink and purple theme going that would go along with all of that lettering. And that finishes the envelope. I love how this envelope turned out. I'm so glad I have pictures of it so that I can mail it off and kind of look back on it after the fact. Big thank you to Susan for allowing me to use her address. And if you would like to submit your address for consideration for future mail art envelopes, make sure you check out the link down below. It is a form that is shared with my monthly giveaways. So you just have to specify on that form that yes, you want your address to be considered for mail art. Just know that it could be shown publicly and you're all set to go. Thank you so much for watching today. I've got 2 more mail art videos for you to check out. I love doing mail art. I think it's so special and unique, and everyone loves to get something in the mail other than a bill. And so seeing some special envelope art is fun as well. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys in another video very soon.